Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today it's time for a garden tour. We're actually going to tour my vegetable garden. I live in Utah, Zone 6/7, and this year has been just a really weird year with weather. And there are some things that are thriving, there are other things that are not doing as well as they've done in the past years, but all in all, it hasn't been a terrible year. So the first thing I'd like to do is start with my green stalks and show you what's growing in my green stalks. But before we get up to the green stalks, I would like to let you know a little bit more about why I do vegetable gardening and what my goals are. Now, my goals in the past were always just to have fresh vegetables to bring into the house, vegetables and fruits. Now, we are going to actually do an urban food forest tour in my next video. This is just going to cover my vegetable gardens. But that changed in, I think it was 2018 or 19. Where I started to notice I was having more and more health issues and I needed to change my diet. And I decided to, with the help of my doctor, to go on a low-carb, high-protein diet. It's not a keto diet. I'm not dedicated enough to get that in-depth. So I just eat a lot of vegetables. I've eliminated sugar and all grains and most carbs. I haven't eliminated all carbs, but I've eliminated most of them. And so I tend to eat basically what I grow except for the meats. Now, I live on a 1/4 acre in Utah. As I said, it's zone 6/7. It's in a very urban area, so there's a lot of homes around me. There's not a lot of growing space, but I have been able to grow enough food where I actually don't have to shop for vegetables year round. Matter of fact, it's June. My garden isn't fully producing yet I still was able to make a vegetable chili with mostly my own homegrown vegetables. So let's start up with my green stock, show you what's up there, and then show you what else I'm growing. Now, I'm a landscape designer. I'm also an avid gardener. And with YouTube, I really like to think about education. So even though I have garden beds all going up that hill, and we have my lower garden beds down here, I wanted to see how much we could grow in a small space. It took me a lot of years to learn how to grow things in pots, but I think I've got that down now. And wanted to see what we could produce in pots in a small area. Didn't want large pots, so I don't have the large pots. This is just a 2-gallon nursery container. And this right here is my Antohi pepper. Now, I planted this by seed and grew it in my indoor growing area, which is just a room that I have in my house. And I'll link a playlist up above that talks a little bit about my indoor growing experiences. But I planted this plant last September and harvested it indoors all winter. And I've had a continual harvest. I think I've had probably about 10 peppers off this plant so far this season. And we've got a lot more coming. But the key that I have found to growing vegetables in pots is to give it the appropriate amount of water. Well, is first the soil. Now, I create my own soil, because I use a ton of it. I grow a lot of stuff in pots now, but I use coconut coir, compost, homemade if I have enough. This right in here is actually homemade compost, and perlite. I don't go with organic fertilizers when growing in pots very often. There are times that I'll use fish emulsion, but most of the time I like to use perlite. And perlite, you can't really see it in here. Well, maybe there's a little one right down in here. Perlite are just little granules that you put in your pot. It's a long-term fertilizer. It's synthetic fertilizer. And every time you water it, it slowly releases all the nutrients your plants need. Now, I use perlite in here. I think Espoma has another granular fertilizer, long-term synthetic fertilizer that you could use. And then I also use a liquid feed. Sometimes I'll use my hydroponic liquid feed. When they're growing outdoors, I'll use Alaska fish emulsion. But I fertilize weekly. And I water these 3 times a week unless it's hot, and then I'll water them more. But you need to look at your plant, stick your finger into the soil, see how moist it is, and not let it dry out and wilt. You've got to keep on top of the watering and keep on top of the fertilizing, and then you will get a lot of great production. So this is an Antohi pepper. It turns beautiful red when it's ripe. Very, very sweet, good pepper. This is my favorite all-time pepper. They turn brilliant orange when they're ripe, and this is a dough hill. This was also grown indoors and harvested all winter long, and it's just got insane production right now. Down here is more experiments to see how small a pot we could grow in and still get production. These are dwarf tomatoes, and definitely they're not the size that they could be if they were in larger pots. These are also in 2-gallon pots, except for this one is in a 1-gallon pot. Let's show you the production on these. This is an Adelaide Festival tomato. We've got one almost ripe there. It's not a full-size tomato yet, but I figure by the time we get a little further down the line, we're going to start getting full-size tomatoes off of these. These were also started last September, and I harvested from them all winter long. Before I brought them outdoors, though, they had developed some thrip problems, so I cut them almost to the ground and then brought them outside, and this is the size that they've grown back to. In the center here, we have a Golden Harvest cherry, and I've been harvesting cherry tomatoes off of this. So these are the only tomatoes that I have that are producing right now because it is the beginning of July and we've had a weird season. Now in my green stalks, I grow a lot of things. We grow the salvias for the hummingbirds, got some blue ones and some red ones. I have almost a half quart of dried chamomile flowers, so I harvest chamomile flowers every time they're ready. We've got the flowers for the looks and for the insects to come in. I love my marigolds. This is one of the few areas where I'll come in and deadhead my flowers. We've got some basil down here. This is a purple opal basil. We've got an ornamental pepper, just because I thought it was so pretty. Look at all the colors in it, in the leaves, and then the little peppers are just really shiny and pretty. Got some up here. We've got some stevia. I have stevia in my garden. This is where I grow my beans. I always grow my beans in the green stock, and we had a big storm that pretty much killed all my beans back to the ground. Some of them grew back, and others I replanted. So I have beans. This right here is marjoram. We've got some beets down at the bottom. So this is purple opal basil. In the shade, it turns beautiful purple. In the sun, and I'll show you one in the sun, it's green with purple speckles. And then this is my favorite basil. This is a purple ruffles basil. We've got another pepper in here. Peppers grow beautifully in green stalks. Got a little bit of lemon verbena, harkening back to my California days. I used to have a tree. It's actually a tree-sized lemon verbena because they don't die back. But I love lemon verbena. Got some more beans. And then I took some cuttings off of my little orange hat tomatoes. This is a microdwarf tomato. I took cuttings off my plants before I turned off the machines indoors and stuck them out here, and they're actually growing. So I'm hoping shortly we're going to actually get orange hat tomatoes. Now for my green stalks, I devised an automatic watering system. So you can see that we have this is a 5-gallon dripper. This is enough that when my irrigation turns on, it goes on for an hour and a half. So I guess it puts 5 gallons per hour in here, but it's enough to drain down the hole in the middle of my green stalk and water all of the levels. Now this is connected, maybe you can see it down here. There's a supply line and a shutoff valve over there that's attached. That line's attached to my garden beds down here. So this line goes off 3 days a week. Every time my garden beds go off, I can turn it on or off right there if I want to. And I haven't had to worry about watering my green stalks. Now, the one thing that I probably will also do is extend that line over to these containers because I've been watering them 3 days a week also. I'll put my peppers down there, and then we could have everything on automatic irrigation. This right here is a roselle cutting that got cut back by the storm. It's just starting to grow back. This is a cutting. I think this is the third year I've done cuttings and been able to grow roselle, so I haven't had to plant seeds. I do plant seeds, but roselle in our area does not have enough time to flower and get the calyxes, because we usually get weather that's too cold by mid-September or the end of September, and that's usually right when the flowers are just about ready to open on these here in Utah. But if I take cuttings and then take the plant indoors, I'm actually able to harvest the calyxes on my roselle. So hopefully this year this will recover fast enough and we'll be able to harvest some calyxes off of this. Another thing that harkens back to my California days is two plants that I always had in my garden in California but have never had until this year. We've got some lemongrass down here. I do have some bad memories of lemongrass from Southern California because they grow nonstop there. I did cut it back in the winter, but they grew so big and they have such sharp edges that I would always get these little micro cuts from it when I would cut it back, and it was really quite painful. So I really don't know why I'm growing it now, other than it smells good. Also got some aloe vera. I grow my aloe vera indoors over the winter, and it does beautifully indoors. It stays green and firm and beautiful. But when I bring it outside, it's just usually way too hot for it. It also needs to be thinned out. But it takes till about the end of July for it to recover and be fully green and gorgeous again. So maybe I need to divide this and just plant one or two of them in this pot and let it continue on its healing process from being brought outside. Now in Southern California, I grew in ground. All of my garden was in ground. But once I moved here to Utah, I decided to try and start an in-ground garden. And this is what I found. This is my native soil. I live on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, and and the slope that we're living on right now, because I live on a steep slope, is called a scree hill, which basically is a hill where it used to be a large lake here, and all of the stones were washed off the mountain and brought down through here. So I have large rocks, small rocks, gravel, very little soil. So all of my beds are raised beds. I have 17 raised beds. And let's start over here and show you my experiment. So this is the south side of my house. And as you can see over here, let me just scroll in. I have a temperature sensor right there against my house. And let me show you a picture of my temperature sensor this morning and what it looked like on different parts of my property. So I have three temperature sensors that are all connected to one station. And the one against the house was 116 degrees, while the other ones were in the 80s. And my tomatoes here, let's get under here and show you what's going on with my tomatoes. I normally start my tomatoes I usually have them planted out by mid-May, and I usually cover them if we get cold weather. And by this time of year, they're always completely full of tomatoes. Well, you can see, this is my Amish paste. We have maybe one tomato on it. I can't even see, there's one tomato. One tomato on this one right here. Where is it? Right there. And my San Marzanos have very few tomatoes. Usually my San Marzanos are completely loaded. But the temperatures on this side of the house have been, let's see, the temperature gauge up there was 116, it was in the 80s. We've been up in the upper 90s, and I've had it up to 121 degrees on this side. And it went from really cold weather in the spring to really hot weather. We've been in the 90s for quite a while. We did have a little bit of cool off, and that's when these other tomatoes started forming. This is a Sun Gold. Sun Gold's kind of cherry tomato. And my tomato production has been really, really low. So what I'm thinking has happened is in the past years, my tomatoes have had time to set fruit while it's cooler. And then I've had fruit ripening during the hot stages, and then when it cools down, we set more fruit, and I usually get a ton of tomatoes. This year, it's not happening because I planted it too late. And so I decided to try and shade these tomatoes and see if we can get better production. And we're getting 100-degree temperatures coming up here shortly. So we're going to keep these shaded for a little while. The only tomatoes that have done well, these are a mix of tomatoes. We've got some kumquat. Here, I'll put the name on the screen. This is a new one for me, but it looks like it's going to be a really pretty cherry tomato. But it's something kumquat, and it's absolutely gorgeous so far. Hardly producing. We're getting a few of them. Back here, we have the most productive tomato of all my tomatoes, and I'm really, really excited about this. This back here turns out to be one of my GMO purple tomatoes. I'll show you the other one. I thought that one back there was going to be one of my jet stars, but it turns out that it looks exactly like this one, which is for sure my GMO purple tomato by the people over at Norfolk. It's the only GMO tomato available to home gardeners, and look at the production on that. It's absolutely gorgeous. And so it's produced despite all the heat and despite the fact that most of my other tomatoes are having a hard time. Usually my jet stars are completely loaded with tomatoes. I have a few on them. So we are going to get some tomatoes, and hopefully we'll get more with the shade. But when this is ready to harvest, I will take you along on my first taste of a GMO purple tomato, and I'm really excited to see how these turn out. I've got some basil here. This is what the purple opal basil looks like when there's a lot of sun. It's starting to flower, so we're going to pick off the flowers. But I have basil here. This is a Thai basil down here, and then we've got some marigolds. So hopefully the shade will help these tomatoes. So those are the two Vijayga raised metal beds. These are Vijayga raised metal beds. Absolutely love the company, love the beds. They've worked out beautifully for me. These beds are on automatic irrigation that I have attached, maybe you can see it through here, that I've attached to an automatic irrigation system to my hose bib. And so I don't need to hand water over here. Now I like to do lots of experiments. We've got 6 beds over here. The block beds are the ones that I have on my hill. This is the first type of bed that I ever created. I wanted raised beds, like I said, because of the soil, and I didn't want to have to build them over and over again. So I chose block over wood. And this first one, we've got red ivy leaf sweet potatoes. We're going to see how well these do here. We've got some tomatillos. I think this bed needs to be taken apart and redone. I am 100% certain that this bed is full of tree roots, and we've lost most of the soil. You can kind of see how much soil we've lost down here. But I have kale and chard that's going to seed. We have another beautiful little volunteer calendula plant. But these plants are struggling, and I have to hand water it more and more, so I'm thinking that it's just getting robbed by tree roots, and it's just not doing very well. So I think we need to redo this bed. This round Vijayga raised metal bed has my Jerusalem artichokes in it. Now I planted, this is my first Vijayga raised metal bed, and I bought it because I wanted Jerusalem artichokes and I wanted a way to contain them. This bed is 17 inches tall. I buried it down 2 inches into the ground just to make sure that the Jerusalem artichokes would not escape, and let's show you how successful that's been. I have been digging them out from around the bottom of the bed every week, and there's another one. So a 17-inch bed buried 2 inches deep is not enough to contain Jerusalem artichokes. If I were to do this again, and maybe I will redo it in the fall, I think I would need to put landscape fabric down underneath, just to make sure that they don't escape. But really shortly here, we're going to have big, beautiful yellow flowers and then a good harvest of Jerusalem artichokes all winter. Now the last 4 beds in here are running an experiment. that's been going exceptionally well. So these are all Vajayga raised meadow beds. We've got row 7 seeds, center cut squash here. It's the first one. Let's see if we can find any here. That's the first one. There's none on that one, but I know there's some on this one. It's the first one to start production this year. So we've got some squash coming on. And I've grown this in the past. The center cut squash is really absolutely a delicious winter squash. It's got a very creamy texture to it. It's like a tromboncino or whatever those long squashes, I don't know how to pronounce it, like the long squashes are, the ones that are shaped like a trumpet that are just huge. This is a mini version of those. And it's mostly meat, very little seed, and it's a very creamy, delicious texture. You can eat them young, like a zucchini. I don't like them as much. A lot of people say they are really good because they've got a nutty, smooth texture. It's not my favorite as a summer squash, but I'm growing them for winter squashes because they're amazing. My very first attempt at pole beans. I haven't vertically gardened hardly at all. This is the first year really that I vertically gardened. We've got some pole beans coming up for the first time. They've reached the top and are trying to reach higher. And we'll see how well they do and see if we like them. This over here is another tomato bed, another Vajayga raised meadow bed. We are not going to be shading this one. It's out in the open and not up against the house, so I think that it stays cool enough that we're actually getting a lot of tomatoes. Now this one right here is the first time I've ever grown the Cherokee Purple. This is a Cherokee Purple, and so is this one. We're getting some good production on this. This right here is a carbon, so we're trying Cherokee Purple and carbon. We got a little one that broke off at the base when I planted them, and it's taken this long to start growing again, but we're going to get production off this one. So we've got 2 carbons, 2 Cherokee Purples. This is just another one of my jet stars. This is what a jet star normally looks like when it's producing properly. We've got a mushroom basket, an absolutely delicious tomato. It turns red and it's got this accordion look to it. And then we've got my sun sugar. Got one here just about ready to harvest. I always have to have sun sugar because these are my very, very favorite tomatoes. This one in the center is a huge smashing success. These are my topaz melons, and topaz melons are very special to me. My ex-husband is Japanese. His grandparents immigrated here to Utah and lived near Delta. Now, if you know Utah and Utah history, near Delta is a place called Topaz Mountain, and there was an internment camp there, a Japanese internment camp. And I'll bet you didn't know there were internment camps in America, and there was one in Utah. Now, my ex-husband's family was never interned there, but the Japanese people, while they were there, farmed. And one of the things that they farmed were melons, and they developed a special melon there called the topaz melon. And we grew it last year, harvested it. And when I say we, my daughter is growing at her place also, and she grew some, and we saved the seeds, and these are seeds that we saved from those topaz melons. Now, I'm really excited because they're doing beautifully this year. And this is my ugly homemade trellis. We're going to see if we can come up with something better next year. It's got to be easy to build. Help me figure out a way to trellis melons, because I think we're going to do melons in the center here almost every year. But help me figure out a way that would be easy for an old woman to build. This back here is a mixture of squash. We've got our honey nut squash in the front. And then we've got some zucchini and some yellow crookneck squash in the back. The zucchini is the Costa Romanesco, which is my very favorite zucchini. And they're all looking great. Now, to talk about the experiment that I'm running back here. I am really excited about this, and I will link a video up above to talk about these beds. These beds are all being watered by this system right here. This is the Thirsty Earth Oya system. It's an automatic Oya system. It needs to be filled. Tomorrow the automatic irrigation is going to go off. It's connected right there to my automatic irrigation system, and that will fill this until it hits the float, and then when the float shuts the water off, it won't fill it anymore. And these beds have been almost exclusively watered by an Oya system, all of these squash. Now, I do have to say, just yesterday I went through and turned on my automatic irrigation system to them. These beds, you can see right here, we have a shutoff valve. These beds are all connected to my automatic irrigation system except for this one right here. This one I haven't connected yet. And they were on the automatic irrigation system first, and I just left it in, and it really actually has helped because we've been hitting the upper 90s, and the Oya system just wasn't keeping up. It was draining the Oya system down to the bottom every couple of days because the plants were needing so much water. And my tomatoes were starting to do leaf curl and wilt because they weren't able to soak up enough water. But it's July, the beginning of July, and it's the first time I've had to water my garden beds with the automatic irrigation system. The rest of the year, they've been just watered by the Oyas. Now, one caveat is I did hand water these until these seedlings right here got about 3 leaves. I planted these by seed, and the Oya system just doesn't give out enough water to help seeds sprout and to nourish them until their roots are long enough to hit the Oya system. But once they had about 3 leaves, they seemed to find the Oya system and they no longer needed water. So now that these beds are rehydrated, I'm going to see how long they go before I need to actually water them with the automatic irrigation system again. So the automatic irrigation system is turned off, and now it's just going to be the Oyas. Like I said, the Oyas are connected to my automatic irrigation system, so they just refill themselves. Now, if you wanted to connect these Oyas to a system that is on all the time, you can actually do that because they have the float valves. Once the water hits the level of the float valve, it will turn off and not fill the container anymore. So I have one container over there, that's the 2.5 gallon, and this one over here is the 5 gallon. So this is exciting. We're going to have enough squash here to get me through for a full year. We're going to have melons that we can freeze probably, maybe dehydrate, I don't know, eat whatever we can. And we're going to have tomatoes, drew some artichokes, sweet potatoes. This is really exciting. Now we're going to move to the first area that I gardened. This area is on a very steep slope. When I first moved here, I really wanted garden beds, and this was the only area because I had 3 kids and 3 dogs. This area down here was all grass and needed to stay grass for some place for my kids to play and the dogs to play. So this is where I built my gardens. So I dug them into the hillside. You can see these need to be reset a little bit. They're starting to tip over. It's been 15 years, so I think they've done pretty well. But they're higher on this side, and then they're dug into the slope on that side so I could have nice even beds. All of my beds are on automatic drip irrigation, and I grow in these beds year-round here in Utah, even when it was classified as zone 5. We've hit temperatures down to 0 degrees and even below. The coldest I've seen is -10. But it hasn't been that cold for quite a long time. But anyway, this is my pepper bed. We've got several different varieties in here. Not as many varieties as we've had last year. And we're going to get some excellent production. Look at this already. So these are, I'll write the name on the screen because I can never pronounce it. It's Aconcagua or something like that. They get absolutely huge. This is only half the size that they get. So you can kind of see. Let's look down there at that one. See how big that one's getting? They're long and they're a wonderful sweet pepper. Right here we have a Corno de Toro Gallo, something like that. We've got production on this, and these are going to be a gorgeous yellow pepper. We've got the Hatch Milds that are just barely starting to flower. They don't have production on them yet. Another one that is just starting to get flowers, but I think is a gorgeous plant. These are the Chocolate Cherry Candy Cane Sweet Bell Peppers. Gorgeous bell peppers, very sweet, very, very tasty. And I've got 3 of those, so that I have more of these. We've got a few starting down here. So let's see if we can see that. So we've got a few of them down there. We've got a chocolate bell right here, so we can have a darker bell pepper. confession, I just planted this one for the color. This is supposed to be an ahi cachuca, but ahi cachucas are round and squat, not long and pointy. So I think I have a different kind of pepper. So we'll see how those ripen and see what they're like. Then we just have a bunch of other ones. We've got an Aleppo pepper, I think, oh, and then the big gems are producing like crazy. Look at this one down here. We're going to have ripe big gems here shortly. Look at all those peppers. We've got the Hawaiian sweet for hot sauce over here. We've got the big gems over here. My hottest pepper is the Sugar Rush Peach, and we're already getting production down there. And we've got another Aleppo over here. Now, confession time, I did create this video 2.5 to 3 weeks ago, and it was a very long garden tour, and I put a harvest video in it, and it was just too long, and I had other videos that I needed to edit first, and so I decided to redo it. But in that video, I harvested my shallots, and here's some footage off of that. So with the shallots, I actually have, and I said them wrong in the first video, and I looked it up, and I think I've got it right now. I think I have French Gray, Dutch Red, and then one that a friend gave me that I don't know the name of. And let me show you what they all look like. So I have a ton of shallots that I'm going to be able to utilize once they dry down. We're going to store those, see how long they store, and I'm excited to try those out. We've got some stevia in this bed. Got some volunteer fennel that I'm going to let reseed. We had shallots in this bed, and this bed right here is more squash. This is another mix. We've got some zucchini, and this is where I put on my spaghetti squash. They're looking absolutely gorgeous. We've got my one sunflower that I allow to reseed here. This is just a wild sunflower, and this is why I allow them to reseed, because the bumblebees and pollinators love these plants. Isn't he cute? Now, they reseed themselves really heavily, so as each flower finishes, I'm going to be cutting them off before they set seed, because I don't like thinning out thousands and thousands of sunflower seeds, which I've done over the years. We finally got it down to manageable levels. So this bed right here is being saved, just like the shallot bed. We're saving these for our fall crops. We've got some chives over there. We've got some dill waiting to be harvested. I wait until the seed heads dry down. I let some fall on the ground for next year's crop, and then I harvest them to make dill pickles with. We've got peppers in this pot. We've got 3 peppers. We've got 3 peppers in this pot. This one right here is an orange bill, also just planted for the color. Then we've got some sweet banana peppers down there. It's kind of hard to see them, but let's see. I think I have an almost ripe one down here. Yeah, look at that. It's almost ripe. So we're going to have a good banana pepper harvest, and with these, I'm going to make pickled banana peppers. Now we have shade cloth over this bed because I just, beginning of July, planted my cucumbers for the first time. Let's see what they look like right now. And the shade cloth has really, really helped. They were heavily wilted before I put the shade cloth over them earlier today. But now it looks like they're going to recover. The only reason we have the shade cloth over them is so that they can get established. We're going to have 100-degree temperatures and probably up to 107 degrees in the next few days. And that's just a bit much for newly planted cucumbers. But I like to plant them this time of year because, number one, I start having room in my garden beds. This was my garlic bed, and after I harvested the garlic, I didn't have a lot of time to put the cucumbers in. That was about 2 weeks ago, and let me show you what my garlic looks like right now. So I definitely have some huge heads of garlic. They're gorgeous. I'm really, really happy with the harvest this year. And I will link a video up above that shows you how I store my garlic and talks a lot about the process that I go through. We've been planting more Thai basil to bring in the pollinators. We've got another pot here, and all my pots are hooked up to the drip irrigation system, the automatic drip irrigation system. So they do go off once every 3 days or so. And with the heavy straw mulch, these have actually stayed quite wet. So this has worked beautifully. But these are all my jalapenos. We've already got some beautiful peppers growing on here. And we've got some that I think are pretty close to time to harvest. And it's the only one with grasshopper damage on it. Now this bed is going to be kind of a little bit of a failure. It's kind of I think it's probably my fault. All of the dill tended to reseed itself here. I don't ever seed the dill myself. I allow it to reseed wherever it falls, and then I harvest it for the heads. But this was my onion bed, and my onions are just not doing well. I think they're getting way too much shade. They're already starting to fall over, and they're not that big. They're really kind of small. So next year I need to do better. I mean, this one hardly has any head on it at all. So anyway, we'll just see what we can do to get a better harvest next year. I already harvested all my red ones because they were dried down and lying on the ground, and they were all smaller than golf ball size. So this bed is failure and success. It is actually the first time I've been able to grow carrots with any sort of size to them ever in my life. These are the Danvers half longs. Most of my carrots come out this size usually. This is the first year that most of them have been this size, and they're really sweet and tasty. So this is the success part. Over here we have a consequence of the wildlife that my property brings in. We have some beautiful little quail that happen to absolutely love beets. So I planted beets in this center area 3 times. They pop up and then they disappear, and I know it's the quail eating them. We've got some more bush beans over there. These are provider bush beans because the birds have eaten them twice. I had a mixed batch of different colors first, but now we're down to provider because those are the only seeds that I could find at the store. But it looks like we're actually going to get something off of those. And then this right here is another very interesting plant that I'm going to do another full video on because of how well it's doing this year. But this is just kind of a mistake. This is not something I planned out. This is a Chinese mountain yam. I planted seeds for it 3 years ago with the intent on harvesting it for its root. Well, I planted it, it came up, it vined all over the place, not as bushy as this, but it did vine quite a bit. And then I dug down to find the roots and couldn't find anything, so I said, you know what, this is just a waste, we're not going to do this again. Well, it came up again the next year. Dug down, tried to dig it out, actually found a few berries. I showed you the flower heads on here. These are the flowers. Last year there was about half as many, and each one of these little flower heads developed little tiny pea-sized potato-looking seeds, I guess is what you could call them, bulbules, seeds, whatever. And they're edible and taste just like potatoes, but they don't have the carb content of potatoes. So I've decided just to let these continue to grow. Look at these. They are so happy now. They're growing up all through my grapes. And we've got seed heads everywhere. Now they do reseed themselves prolifically. I've been pulling out the new little growths. I don't know if there's any more new ones in here, but I think it's actually going to be worth it this year. Last year I got enough for 1 meal. This year we might get enough for more than 1 meal. And maybe I'll save some of these seeds and share them with local people because I think this is very worth it. Now, if you could dig down and actually get the roots on these, in Japan they call them nagaimo, and they're kind of a long, starchy, the only word I can think of is slimy, mucilaginous root that is very healthy for you. I've never dug down to see if I can find the roots again to harvest those, but you can harvest them for the roots and for the little bulbules, so it's a multi-purpose plant. And look how many we're going to have. This year is going to be the first year where we're going to have enough to count it as a really good harvest. Like I said, it's the third year. So that's it for my garden tour. I am looking forward to a good harvest. We've had a few failures, but not as many failures as we've had in the past years. And I always look at the failures in my garden as opportunities to improve. You learn what your plants don't like, what plants will grow, what plants won't grow, what conditions you need to do things for, like shading the tomatoes on my side yard. We'll see if that works and I'll report back. And the other things that I didn't show you that I'm going to do in another video are all my fruits. I have a ton of fruit growing on my property, more fruit than vegetables actually, which is kind of weird since I'm doing the low carb diet, but that's why I said I didn't remove all carbs. I do eat my fruit. And I'll do another tour next on my urban food forest so you can see what I'm growing for fruit. The other things I didn't show you are all my herbs. I grow at least 35 varieties of herbs all through my property, and I'll link a playlist up above that shows you some of my herbs that I'm growing. Now I'd love to know how your vegetables are growing this year. Is your weather been weird like ours? Really cold, then hot, and then cold? Or are you having a better year than we are? So hopefully this video has been helpful for you. If it has been helpful, I hope you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and